Honourable Senators, I see a quorum. The Standing Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade is called to order. I'm going to ask the Senators to introduce themselves, starting on my left.
Patricia Bovey, Senator from Manitoba.
Yes, Senator No. Senator No, next.
Oh, okay. Senator Ngo from Ontario.
Senator Ontario.
Salma Taulajan, Ontario.
And I'm Rainelle Landrychuk from Saskatchewan. We have some other senators who have been called to other meetings who will be joining us. And we are on time, and I know 2 witnesses have to leave within a timely frame, so we're going to accommodate them. First of all, I would note that the committee has been authorized by the Senate to study the impact and utilization of Canadian culture and arts in Canadian foreign policy and diplomacy and other related matters. Under this mandate, the committee is pleased today to continue its study. We have, by video conference from Montreal, Madame Phyllis Lambert, founder, Director Emeritus of the Canadian Centre for Architecture. And I'm going to stop here. Madame, can you hear us?
Perfectly well, thank you.
Thank you. Our video is working. We hope it continues. And here in Ottawa, we have Mr. Gideon Arthurs, Director General of the National Theatre School of Canada, and Mr. Howard, do you say Zhang or Yang?
Zhang, like Zhang.
Vice President, Arts and Leadership at the Banff Centre of Arts and Creativity, who delightfully arrived in Ottawa before the massive snowstorm in Calgary, so we're pleased you're here. So without further delay, the biographies have been disseminated in all material. We do that so that senators are well equipped to come to the hearing and also to use our time efficiently to hear from you, the witnesses. So I'm going to take you in the order that you were introduced. So, Madame Lambert, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honourable members of the Senate, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about something which I have had a great deal of experience, that is the impact and use of Canadian culture in foreign policy. In 1979, I founded the CCA as an imaginative and polemic institution. Such an institution is ever more necessary in a time of deep change and rupture like the one we are currently experiencing. The crisis of the environment, from the exploitation of resources to climate change, the rising inequality is reflected in the living conditions, and the impact of technological transformation in the work conditions. Today, the CCA has a major impact as an international institution operating from the fundamental premise that architecture, considered as an enlarged field within historical, theoretical, and critical discourse, architecture is a public concern. From our physical home in Montreal, but also through our CCA elsewhere activities worldwide and our virtual home online, we support and produce research, exhibitions, publications, and a range of public programs driven by explaining how architecture shapes and may reshape contemporary life. We invite architects, photographers, students, scholars, and the wider public to engage with our extensive collection to deepen our understanding of the past and giving new relevance to architectural thinking in light of current disciplinary and societal issues. Like many players on Canada's art scene, we are cultural diplomats, acting as international ambassadors, but also as international hosts for intellectual and artistic thought and practice. I would now like to present an approach appropriate, I believe, to other cultural institutions, and which, adopted by the Canadian government, would allow Canada to be culturally powerful on an international level. It requires three key shifts of focus. Number one, from export to exchange. Number two, from governments to institutions. Number three, from money to people. First, may I discuss shifting the focus from export to exchange. Cultural diplomacy is not a one-way street. At its heart is the promotion of ideas, which is the key to knowledge and to cultural exchange. Rather than the unidirectional flow of traditional practices as cultural export, two-way exchange through discussion and debate enhances cultural production. This exchange can take place nationally and internationally through many modes: conferences, exhibitions, concerts, hackathons, plays, festivals, game jams. Notably, the loci of cultural exchange are forever shifting. We can no longer rely on shipping cultural artifacts and sitting back to wait for an international public to find us. To remain culturally relevant, we need to export ideas and to receive them in return. This exchange is at the core of cultural production. Otherwise, we risk being culturally isolated from and irrelevant to the major players on the international cultural scene. For this exchange to meet with success, we must shift focus from governments to institutions, promoting and reinforcing synergies among different cultural institutions, both within Canada and internationally. And I'd like to elaborate on this later. With this shift, we can open ourselves to greater collaborative potential. As I mentioned earlier, the exchange of ideas takes us beyond simply placing an artifact in dominant land locations. Rather, it creates meaningful dialogue in emerging spaces of cultural relevance. Indeed, international events should act as engines of cultural production and as powerful diplomatic tools that can and should include numerous activities of promotion by the Canadian Embassy programs. However, Canada's traditional lack of management and underfunding of international exhibitions like the Venice Architectural Biennale puts our country at a great disadvantage. And since many new biennales and triennales are being established around the world, a mechanism should be put in place to identify which ones should receive appropriate support. By shifting focus from money to people, we can expand Canada's cultural horizons most convincingly. Please don't misunderstand. I am not saying that money is not relevant or necessary in this project of cultural exchange. It is, and very much so. Unfortunately, support formerly available has been eliminated and minimized in areas such as cultural centers attached to embassies and also programs such as l'aide à la tournée des arts et de la scène. The point is, we can never lose sight of the fact that when it comes to cultural diplomacy, people are the driving force. Excuse me. We must open our doors more widely to foreign participants in this process of exchange. But stringent visa restrictions and growing fees have severely limited such exchange, rather than facilitating the movement of cultural agents that foster ties among international community of thinkers and producers. This is a real problem. Then, when obstacles to participation are eased or removed entirely, and when programs of cultural exchange are repeated year after year, those ties become immensely strong. I've seen the richness of this exchange firsthand with the CCA's Research Centre and through our countless collaboration with other like-minded institutions worldwide. The bright young minds who come through our doors and often return and who produce new knowledge with us greatly contribute to Canada's cultural capital while at the same time they are more able to contribute to their own cultures. In closing, let me reiterate my firm belief that this shift in focus from export to exchange, from governments to institutions, and from money to people can only strengthen the place of Canada's cultural industry as a major factor in its economic prosperity. Thank you for your attention and consideration, and I'll be pleased to answer questions that I hope my presentation has elicited.
Thank you very much. You have covered a broad area, and I can see some of the areas that I think will resonate in our report. So we'll get to the questions. But our next presenter will be Mr. Gideon Arthurs. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci pour cette...
Thank you for this invitation to provide testimony on this critical matter.
Time to examine the question of cultural diplomacy and cultural exportation so thoroughly. My name is Gideon Arthurs. I'm here today as the CEO of the National Theatre School of Canada, this country's premier theatre training organization. At NTS, we offer intensely rigorous training to young theatre makers in both official languages. Over the past 2 years, we've expanded our programming from serving 160 people to now over 8,000 people who are involved in our programs, most notably through the National Theatre School Festival, formerly known as the Sears Drama Festival. L'École nationale de théâtre a...
The National Theatre School of Canada was founded in 1960 to serve a performing arts community that had not yet found its own identity. Our performers left for London or Paris and came back to reproduce European theatre here. 6 decades later, we no longer have to discuss the legitimacy of Canadian and Quebec theatre. Today, this sector enjoys international recognition.
This not only to celebrate our sector, but to underline how fitting it is that in 2018 we are now discussing how this mature, singularly Canadian sector can advance our nation's interests and goals internationally, a fitting reversal, I think, of our not-so-distant past. Sachant que mes collègues vous ont...
I know that my colleagues will have already outlined various accomplishments as broadcasters or producers, so I will concentrate my comments on the role of training institutions in this conversation.
Leave this committee with a clear idea of the production chain required to produce international caliber work in the performing arts. But before I do so, I will permit myself to speak briefly on the importance of including Canadian arts and cultures in our efforts abroad. And please excuse me if I wax a little too lyrically, but it's a subject that is near and dear to my heart. Je crois que fondamentalement...
I believe that fundamentally, the role of the arts is to bring people together. By experiencing something together, we allow ourselves to think and to feel collectively, which in turn builds a community, brings about debate and healthy exchanges, and is a catalyst for creativity for all participants.
And it lives in a liminal space where we know fundamentally that what we are seeing is not real. The couple on stage have argued every night since opening night. The prima ballerina is not, in fact, a swan. But we allow the feelings their performances evoke to feel real, to touch us enough to weep for the motherless child, or to hope beyond hope that Orpheus won't turn around this time. All this high-minded philosophizing to say that we live today in a peculiar time, one that I would argue is suffering first and foremost from an empathy deficit. Somehow, with all of the means to communicate at our disposal, we have lost the ability to understand the other, to understand that we have more in common than not. Perhaps what we need is more opportunities to sit in a dark room with strangers and feel something together. Art is our vehicle to understand the other, to find the commonalities rather than the differences, to come to an agreement, which sounds like diplomacy to me, and it sounds like a role that Canada must assume in an international context that is increasingly divisive and lacking in mutual understanding. En fait,
In fact, this resembles a form of very Canadian diplomacy, a manifestation of the plurality of this country, of our openness to new arrivals, our relationship that is growing with our First Nations. Our social fabric is built upon empathy. We could even say that empathy is our greatest natural resource. And if such is the case, should we not be talking about a pipeline to help us reach new markets?
Business case for cultural exportation and diplomacy. The argument becomes clear when we understand the numbers. Les industries culturelles contribuent 50...
Cultural industries contribute $54 billion per year to our economy, accounting for 3% of our GDP, which is a greater added value than what we see for agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting.
3.5% of working Canadians have jobs in the cultural industries. These are all statistics you are no doubt familiar with. There are endless studies on the positive economic impacts of the cultural sector on our economy at home, with an incredible spin-on effect for restaurants, parking revenues, real estate values, neighborhood safety, and far, far beyond. The return on investment is higher than many, many other commercial sectors. For an industry of this size and impact, it is vital to have a coherent, comprehensive strategy to make sure that it can live up to its potential by reaching new markets. De toute évidence, l'École nationale...
Clearly, the National Theatre School is not a touring organization nor a producer. We don't export productions. But we recently established new relationships with the Conservatoire de Paris, l'École du Nord in Lille, France, and l'Escuela del Arte Teatral in Mexico. Our ability to forge more international relations with the school is limited only by our budget. That being said, our training institutions do an even greater role than the creation of partnerships with schools situated beyond our borders. They, in fact, are the very first link in a chain of production that adds value to cultural products. We must train performers, invest in their development, create conditions favorable to innovation, and provide to them the platforms they need to reach new markets.
Is competitive. To make work that can stand shoulder to shoulder with international competition, we must invest all along the production chain. If we were speaking today about athletics, we could be discussing the Own the Podium program that recognizes the importance of early investment to bring home Olympic gold. There would be little to debate if we were discussing commercial industries. Experts must be trained, the right conditions must be put in place to meet the needs of the industry. The same is true for culture. Recent significant investments in the Canada Council have gone some way in making sure that our cultural industries are competitive. But the Council supports the middle link in the chain, specifically the creation and development step in the process. On either side of that is training and presentation. La formation et la...
Training and performance, supported by the Canadian Fund for Training in the Arts and the Fund for Canadian Heritage, are at both ends of this stage. This funding hasn't increased since 2009, totaling less than $65 million to support all of training and artistic performance production. It is imperative that there be a renewed investment in order to respond to the needs of the sector. Without this investment, there will be a bottleneck within the process, because these artists who create works don't have the training and can't show their work beyond a very local context.
Without that additional investment, Canadian work will not be able to thrive in an international context where the world's best are supported by highly integrated, heavily state-supported cultural policies. If our artists are to be called upon to represent this nation's interests, to manifest Canadian values, if an industry of this value is to access new marketplaces, they must have the same opportunities as their international peers. So I applaud your efforts on this committee and hope that in your findings you will examine the necessity of investment all along the production chain to ensure that this most Canadian of exports can be as competitive as you hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. And our final witness, Mr. Zhang.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to inform your study on the impact and utilization of Canadian culture and arts in Canadian foreign policy and diplomacy. Yes, my name is Howard Zhang, and I am the Vice President of Arts and Leadership at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. My career has spanned over 30 years leading large arts organizations in theater, music, and ballet in Vancouver, Winnipeg, and New York City. From 2012 to 2016, I served as a member of the board of the Canada Council for the Arts and represented the Canada Council on the Executive Committee on the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. Banff Centre is Canada's largest post-secondary multidisciplinary arts and leadership training institute. It welcomes nearly 4,000 artists and leaders to its gorgeous 42-acre campus in Banff National Park. Founded in 1933 as a theatre school, Banff Centre has welcomed more than 75,000 artists over the past 85 years. Artists come to Banff from across Canada and around the world. Some of our most celebrated faculty and alumni include Oscar Peterson, Margaret Atwood, W.O. Mitchell, Jan Martel, The Broken Social Scene, Arcade Fire, Sean McCann, Renata Arda, Tanya Takat, Crystal Pite, and the list goes on and on. Now, artists come to Banff to...
Could you perhaps slow down? We have to translate.
Absolutely.
And we want to catch up with
Absolutely.
your words. So
My name is Howard Jane. I'm sorry. I'm happy to.
Thank you.
And so artists do come to Banff Centre to learn and perfect their craft and to create their next work of art that is shared not only across Canada, but around the world. 25% of our artists are international. Many come to Banff from the United States to study with our Canadian and American faculty. We currently have New Yorkers Susan Orlean teaching literary arts at Banff. Vijay Iyer, one of the world's greatest jazz musicians and composers, teaches and leads our jazz and creative music program. So our campus is beloved by students from around the world. We also created an incredible festival in the 1970s called the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival, which will be showcasing 88 mountain adventure films from around the world this October 27th to November 4th. This highly recognized international festival draws more than 20,000 people who come to Banff Centre for this festival every year. But what's more remarkable is that the same festival provides content that gets exported every year to 550 locations in 40 countries, including places as remote as Antarctica, Argentina, Australia, Bangladesh, Brazil, China, Denmark, England, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, India, Japan, Lebanon, Mexico, the Netherlands, South Africa, Switzerland, Taiwan, Venezuela, and Wales. The business model for the export of this extraordinary cultural product is tried and true. Banff Centre has been producing this content for international consumption in this way for decades now. The winning films from the festival in Banff provide a menu of content that film hosts around the world purchase from Banff Centre. Typically, the package includes a representative from Banff to host the evening, or in some cases, several evenings of presentation. There are some locations that feature the festival content over 5 nights. Credit and royalties, of course, go to the filmmakers. And the Banff Centre and the Canadian brand received worldwide recognition. As a result, it's a win-win for all involved. The business model provides Banff Centre with revenue to support its operations, and it promotes the export of numerous filmmakers who enter their work in the festival. As a result, Banff and Canada are recognized around the world associated with this highly quality film content. Experience tells us that some international audiences only know and associate Banff, Alberta as a result of the festival experience. We are one of Canada's greatest cultural exporters through our education and residency programs at Banff Centre and through this extraordinary record of international outreach through our Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival World Tour. So why is public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy important? Because it allows us to tell the Canadian story at home and abroad and to project our values of tolerance, openness, and diversity. Because of our unique position in the cultural landscape in Canada, Banff Centre, with its beautiful campus and conference facility, can convene the world's cultural leaders to explore the issues facing our country and the international community when it comes to culture. In this digital era, we are all grappling with how to promote our own distinct voices or culture as we are engulfed by social media. Cultural sovereignty in the digital age is something Canadian arts leaders are talking about, but so is the rest of the world, and we would love to invite them to Banff Centre to conduct research into these areas, to publish and disseminate their findings widely, and to convene and meet one another to find solutions to some of the biggest questions that face us today. Consequently, Banff Centre is studying the opportunity to establish deeper applied research, summits, and think tanks to lead Canadian arts and cultural policy research, creation, and communication, which would serve the creative industry and ensure employer relevance. As a result, Canada could be strengthened through the vitality of its cultures, with Canadians more connected through creativity and empowered through creative entrepreneurship. We aspire to lead Canadian arts and cultural policy research, and we believe we have a unique role to play in Canadian cultural diplomacy, including the export of cultural products as a place where the world can come to meet and discuss complex issues related to culture, and the place in Canada where world artists can come, learn, create, and perform along with their Canadian colleagues, which of course creates greater global understanding. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. We've had three very unique presentations, and I'm now going to turn to senators to pose some questions, starting with Senator Bovey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all our presenters. And Madame Lambert, it's wonderful to see you again. We all know that we're in a time which has been dubbed the knowledge economy, and that a big part of that knowledge economy is the creative and intellectual property. Therefore, with that knowledge, I want to explore a theme that's come through each of your presentations, that of innovation. Madame Lambert, you talked about very poignantly, you talked about the need for international dialogue, which you certainly have achieved through the CCA. Again, with theatre and training and the work that you're doing, Mr. Arthurs and Mr. Jang, what you've achieved, or the Banff Centre has achieved through its history. Can we dig deeper? A buzzword in Canadian society now is innovation. We talk about scientific innovation. We talk about all sorts of kinds of innovation. But I'd like us to explore the innovation through creative dialogue, through creative exhibitions, exchange of artistic expression. Can we dig deeper on that? Would each of you please dig deeper on that when it comes to the role of Canada on that international stage?
We'll take our witnesses in the order that they presented. Madame Lambert.
Well, I think that in our exhibitions and in our programs, we're there to ask questions. We're not there to tell people what to think. And so we've had huge exhibitions that relate to what we could do with the city, space honesty, and speed limits, which deal with technology in shaping our society and architecture, and journeys, how traveling fruit ideas and buildings rearrange our environment, and the role of we've experimented tremendously in digital, born digital in the machine. We've had a series of 3 exhibitions on the subject, and we of course have the documents that support this kind of information. So this is many people from all different countries are involved in doing this. And we also have a very interesting programs, which we call the CEO CCA, with, for example, Portugal, in which, because we have the collection of one of their great architects, who's one of the recognized, by the, what is that great prize? I can't think of his name right now. But they, and so we have a relationship with the Ceralves in Porto, with the Gulbenkian in Lisbon. And we've had exhibitions from, so we catalog and we work together in terms of just establishing connections. Okay, but we also have been able to have exhibitions from our place go to Portugal, and even to the Biennale. We collaborated with Portugal on an exhibition at the last Biennale on architecture called Where Caesar Meets Rossi. So there's a tremendous amount of these are interpersonal things. I think that what we do is we train people, we train minds. And I think that is what I am trying to establish. It's not big, of course we have conferences and such, and debates, but it's this way of how to do it, how we can bring our ideas to more people and to convince them about the importance of our environment and the built world.
Thank you.
I think it's a vital question, and I'll try to give a couple of concrete examples to talk about it. But I think a bit of framing that is important is we talk about the knowledge economy, and we also talk about the creative economy, an economy that requires people who are able to tell stories. You will know now that companies are looking for new ways to reach potential audiences and potential customers, and they're turning to the creative fields to try to tell those stories. And what we've had a little bit of a block here in Canada is that there seems to be a separation between the cultural sector as an artistic sector and what we call the cultural industries, as if broadcasting could exist without content, as if a great ad could exist without a cinematographer. I'll give you an example of how the art sector and the investments we made in the art sector lead into this economy, and how, in fact, it's gone on to international renown. I am based in Montreal at the National Theatre School, and Montreal is world-renowned for its cultural export, and in particular in the domains of digital content around things like video mapping and live productions, and the center of video game creation in North America at the moment. The National Theatre School of Canada had a partnership with Ubisoft that trained National Theatre School actors to perform in green screen technology, actually more than green screen, motion capture technology, in order to be able to play the characters in video games. These are video games that are played internationally, a multi-billion-dollar industry. And what they needed was young actors who knew how to cry on command, because their cameras are so advanced now that they needed to capture that emotion, no longer just the domain of monsters and people doing backflips. It is the human story that is driving the cultural industries. So I think that there is a connection that needs to be rebuilt between the cultural sector and these so-called industries in order to drive that innovation conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Jang?
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Bobby, for the question. And the concept of innovation has been something that's been on the table for us as a sector for a long time. And the reason why it's been on the table is because what we really believe and strongly is it's about a process discussion in our minds. And the process being that the creative process is actually the ways in which we're now learning of new ways to problem solve. That the artistic process now is becoming a part of the ways in which we're now beginning to address societal issues, the ways in which we're trying to address new ways of thinking and relating to our communities. And what we're learning, particularly at Banff Centre, but throughout the country in the work of our artists, is that if we combine the concept of exploration and the concept of curiosity, we get innovation. We get the opportunity to actually collaborate, and those are three words that all three of us use today in really critical areas of thought, and because collaboration has become key to the way we engage with our communities. And collaboration is not necessarily always with other artists. It's collaborating with other communities, collaborating with the opportunity to actually work with the businesses across the street, the other not-for-profit organizations dealing with issues. I had the pleasure of working at Simon Fraser University in the downtown campus, at SFU Woodwards in the downtown east side. And to tell you what it was like to work in an institution embedded in, as we know, one of the most struggling postal codes in our country, to see how we worked and collaborated and innovated new ways of thinking and understanding of how to work and build healthier and vital communities. It's the difference between STEM and STEAM. It's the opportunity for us to, in a sense, we used to talk about arts and culture being at the center of our communities. And now we're talking about arts and culture being at the table with our communities, being in partnership with the other parts of our communities that are critical to us. Socially relevant areas of practice is where we are now finding innovation. And what we're excited about is that we're now seeing advances in society and healthier communities.
If I can have
Yes, please.
just one quick follow-up, if I may, just to cap this perhaps. Madame Lambert, you talked about the work you've done with Portugal, and I well know many of the international collaborations that you have spearheaded and been involved in. And you also talked about architecture defining our cities, defining our living spaces. And perhaps you could tie that together with what Howard Jang just said about working across the street and put it into the international stage, that defining Canadian values, but making the world a better place as a result of these international collaborations and innovations.
Question of formation of thinking. And so it is a process of ideas and developing those ideas. And also it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's very much an individual contact, one-on-one. And when it becomes a kind of mass production, I don't think that really achieves something. So I think that's the way I can answer that best.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator O.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the presenters. We are very fortunate today to have the three very outstanding, I would say, cultural creators, cultural diplomacy activities, that you guys done a great job. I want to bring the question back to what Senator mentioned earlier on about, in what extent and in what ways do your sectors integrate into new technology and digital medias and to get it into international stage?
I'm happy to enter. Or would you like to go on the order, Madam Chair?
We'll just keep going with the orders we have. I don't
Whatever
know.
the first
Madame
one's ready.
Lambert, if you have anything to add to that. If not, I'll turn to the next.
I certainly do have much to add to it.
Thank you.
A lot of museums are building new buildings. We're a research center as a museum, and they're building new buildings. Our second building is our website, and so that we have experimented with our website, and it is really a place where to learn, where we ask people to read. We provide, obviously we give access to the collections, and so we have experimented with this, and I think that we're a small place, and to be able to connect to others by using the website is a fantastically good tool. And then, of course, we have really led the world, I think, in terms of the use of the internet, the computer, the digital, to create an understanding and develop the use of the creation of in the computer design. It's not using the computer as a way of replicating or producing drawings. That's of course useful, but it's beyond that. It's really much fantastic kind of design that is done within the computer, and how that can extend. As I said, we've had 3 major exhibitions on that, and a collection that's been able to work, the early work that was done, that is really wouldn't be lost if we had brought it in and actually catalogued it, which was not easy at all. So I would say that these are the areas that we are involved in the computer. And then we're also very much involved with that in terms of administration within the whole CCA, within management of the whole CCA. We find that these are not separate sectors. We connect our computer, our digital systems to our curatorial, so that they work together. These are not separate silos, and we work horizontally across the board.
Thank you. Mr. Arthurs? Yeah.
I'll give a couple of concrete examples of how we're working directly in new technologies, but just take a second to stress again that at the heart of good technology is the content that is being created by a human being, that there is still much to define in new technology, the difference between serving the technology and serving the interests of communities through technology. I'll, at a different Senate hearing when I'm invited again, I'll defend the importance of live arts to everyone. But there are a few important areas where technologies are being integrated a lot into the creative process. And it really, to come back to the idea of how technologies are being conceived of, it's often through the same process as a collective creation in theater or in other art forms, where you start with an idea, you prototype quickly, you then take it to market and you test it. At our school in particular, and we're talking very young people, our production students and our production design and technical arts program, 100% of them are hired before graduating from our program because of their familiarity with new technologies. They are adept at video mapping, which is a particularly strong field right now in the performing arts, where video is being integrated with human movement and the decor. We have exploring more ecologically friendly approaches to production design in the arts. And we even have some proposals on the table to look at augmented reality for set design, so that you might see things on stage using augmented reality rather than having to build it. Those are all domains that are currently of great interest in the theater world. But again, it comes down to that moment where an audience takes that information and feels something.
Mr. Jang?
Thank you very much. Technology is actually probably on everyone's strategic thinking list right now for all of our entire community. When we think of technology, when I think of technology as it relates to our industry, I think of it in two streams. One is being the creative process, as Gideon has spoken to it, and we can all remember and now see when we go to a performance today, you're seeing less physical sets. You're seeing much more technology on stage. But that's really coming down to one really big issue that we're always trying to grapple with in our communities, is how do we build deeper, more intrinsic relationships with our communities. And what we're trying to unpack right now when it comes to technology is how technology can actually serve us better in deepening those relationships. So our artists and creative thinkers are now exploring really new, interesting ways, whether it's through augmented reality, whether it's through, but the technology is not the thing, it's the goal, which is to create that better story, that deeper story that you can actually connect with an audience. I mentioned there were two different ways of looking at it. The other one is the platforms and the way we communicate through technology and how much that changed. Yes, it used to be about bums and seats. That was the measurement of success, and you can talk about live performance. Now it's eyeballs. How many eyeballs can we get to actually see the work? And when we see the work, we're talking about live streaming. We're talking about ways in which to engage a global community. And that's one way. The thing that links both those creative process and communication is something we call discoverability. The opportunity to actually discover through technology and deepen your experience by discovering what is happening as well as extending what is happening. And we're just unpacking what discoverability is to us today, because what we're learning right now is that the show doesn't end at 10 o'clock when the curtain goes down. What happens is we're creating memories. And memories and technology is helping us today to create deeper memories, and deeper memories that go beyond our theaters or our concert halls, but rather beyond our borders.
One small question.
Please.
Small question for Mr. Arthurs. What are the most successful federal programs in the arts sector that strengthen Canadian culture for the National Theatre School of Canada?
That's a great question. So I would say that this government's recent investment in the Canada Council is heartening to our graduates. It's the bread and butter of the cultural community. But really, we believe that there is a required investment or a great impact in everything that allows them to reach new audiences. So the creation and development is one thing, but there is the Arts Presentation Fund of Canada, which is of vital importance to our community.
Thank you.
Arts training.
Well, obviously, for us personally as an institution, the Arts Training Fund is vitally important, but for our graduates, definitely that presentation piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Tulajan.
Thank you, Chair. I thank all of you for your presentations. So the majority of the witnesses that have appeared before this committee have stressed the importance of cultural diplomacy. For us, it means promoting mutual understanding between countries, promoting the Canadian brand, and encouraging trade in cultural products. In your opinion, does cultural diplomacy achieve these results? Or is it underestimated or is it exaggerated?
Madame Lambert, do you have an answer?
Yes. Well, I think that cultural diplomacy is extremely important in terms of representation in I talked about the embassies, for example, and when the embassies become involved with presenting and expanding the work that's done, this is enormous. And for example, Paris has a great program for presenting the arts in general, and that's been hugely important. And so it has created an environment where many, excuse me, groups in Canada, or in Montreal, I'm sorry, not Canada, that I know of, but certainly in Montreal, are completely related to these programs. And also, for example, when I mentioned Portugal earlier, when the president of Portugal came over to discuss with Justin Trudeau, he came over very especially to the CCA because he appreciated that connection that we have. Well, these interactions, I think, are hugely important. And for example, I talked also about the program of the tournée on the stage. Now, that's a program that individuals. I know somebody who goes and sings in various places in France, and this is tremendous. But the support for this is was actually cut out, and it was such a huge sector. There, I think that there were how many? I'm sorry, I don't. Oh, yes, here it is. There were 175 institutions that were abandoned. 15 million in revenue. Well, these are ambassadors. These are people that connect to other people. Who I think it's always again on this personal level of the presentation, and of course, there's many people that are brought into it.
Suggests that in general in Canada, the cultural diplomacy is underestimated. I would point, in fact, to our greatest success story, which are the cultural export strategies from the province of Quebec. We could easily talk about Cirque du Soleil, Sept Doigts de la Main, Robert Lepage, all name brands that are recognized internationally and do so much to advance the world's understanding of what Quebec is. And I think in the cultural context, and maybe Howard disagrees with me, but in the cultural context, Quebec's brand for cultural presence is stronger than Canada's. That there is a Howard does disagree with me, but that there is a deep recognition of the role that Quebec plays in the world and what it stands for because of the artists that it is able to put in contact with other international artists. I would argue that there is extraordinary talent and potential in the rest of Canada to create a cultural brand that would be recognized internationally. But I truly believe it's a question of access to markets and support all of the way along the chain of creation.
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with you. But I agree with you because of our knowledge and deep, long history of being in the sector, of understanding how critical early investment and the historical investment that Quebec has made in their cultural industries, and we can see the value of that. But we do know there are, we can list 100 probably right now that talk about where cultural diplomacy has really made the difference. Just look at the National Arts Centre Orchestra when they toured to China. And how critical that was when with that, and how that was actually more than just a hand across the ocean, but it was really an opportunity to actually initiate that relationship that began to be critical to our relationship with China. And we can go on to the role that Betroffenheit has played, an incredible dance production, proudly created in Banff, but more importantly has garnered international acclaim, winning the Olivier Award in London and across Europe and around the world. One area that's fascinating to me when it comes to culture is the impact it has in tourism. I've also had a significant experience. I was part of the Cultural Olympiad organization in Vancouver during 2010, and really saw firsthand what the impact of the Cultural Olympiad had of bringing international and opportunities to collaborate on an international scale. All those the cultural events that occurred, and we're seeing really firsthand. And I spoke quite a bit about our Banff Centre Mountain Film Festival that's in 40 different countries around the world, and we're seeing a significant impact when it comes to brand development, when it comes to economic development, and when it comes to where Banff Centre has been able to position itself on the world stage.
Sure.
So, Mr. Jang, my question to you is the Banff Centre. Do you use social media at all to promote?
I would say our entire sector has moved away from what we'd call mainstream media from almost all our promotion and connections that we're making. Blogging is critical to us now, the blogging community. I'd say our invite list probably to shows actually probably have more coming from social media agencies so yes, absolutely.
Can I ask Mr. Arthurs?
Please.
Mr. Arthurs,
We have time.
you just made a very interesting statement, and I think that we're all hard-pressed to disagree with you, is that Quebec's brand is stronger than Canada's. So what does Quebec do differently? What can the other provinces learn from Quebec?
It really comes down to a question of root and leaf investment, that there is an investment all the way through the process. And this, I think, spans all of the art forms. I can speak specifically to the performing arts. There is a profound belief that young people should have access to experiencing art. From there are opportunities for both preparatory and classes for pleasure in the performing arts, and then there are well-funded training institutions that prepare artists for careers. And then a crucial stage is an investment in the development right after school. I've never been in an ecology, an arts ecology, that so well supports its emerging artistic scene. They have les centres des artistes, which are artist-run centers for visual artists. There's les maisons de la culture, which are embedded in communities across the island of Montreal, for example. Incredible infrastructure to support emerging artists. And then real availability for touring money. They support their industries because they realize that it brings back huge return on investments. There's also an interesting hybrid in Quebec that doesn't exist in the rest of Canada, which is that there is a commercial possibility for artistic work. Companies like Sept Doigts de la Main have two wings. They have their foundation to do their more community-based work, and then they'll be doing the choreography for the Sochi opening ceremonies, which is a highly profitable enterprise for them, which is also supported by a very rich and complex ecology that is built into a cultural policy supported by the state.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I just follow up on a slightly different tack? We're centering on what the government role should be. But increasingly, as I travel countries, the corporate sector sees its corporate responsibility to support culture, and they make the equation between their businesses and that. Governments have to balance regions and interest groups, et cetera, and it would seem that corporations make a business choice. To what extent do our laws preclude or encourage businesses to look at the cultural sector? I come from Saskatchewan. We have a REME Centre now that we're very proud of, really initiated in the business community, which brought on the government support, and at all levels, municipal, provincial, and federal. So is there something we can say as a committee in this study pointed to the laws, the encouragement to have a community responsibility or a corporate responsibility? Anything of help? Madame Lambert?
I'm not sure that it's a question of laws necessarily. I don't know anything about I can't answer that aspect, but I certainly know that businesses, when they're considering investing, and I don't like the idea of donating, but investing in a cultural or a architectural, a cultural, a social housing, these kind of things, they want to be able to first of all, they look for the people that support that gives the most biggest bang for the buck, I guess. For example, the symphony has thousands of donors, and so they like that. And yet, so many of the smaller organizations that don't have this kind of, they're not, they don't have huge roles of people who follow them, but they have a deep cultural impact in terms of learning. And so I think that there's a problem with that, with not being able to, the businesses not being able to,
Perhaps we turn to Mr. Arthur.
I can't hear you.
I think we're having a bit of video problem. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Is there something further you wish to add? We were just, the video faulted, I think, right at the last sentence. But if there's anything else you want to add, or I'll turn to the next witness.
Well, I think you heard my last sentence.
Yes.
Okay, well then I think that I'll stand with that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arthurs.
I think it's a great question. I think that I would tend to agree there isn't a legal obstacle in place. There is certainly is an issue about a disproportionate investment by the private sector in large companies versus small companies, but that's something that internally in our sector we should be doing a better job of. But I can tell you that in our quite successful fundraising efforts in the private sector, we are seen as really an outlet for corporations to express their humanity and their engagement towards their communities. As I mentioned, we recently took over the Sears Drama Festival, which takes place in 450 high schools across Canada, and we're hoping to announce next week a national sponsor who are interested in being present in all of those communities in one of the most beloved cultural contexts that exists. And so that relationship is incredibly important, but I don't think that we have any particular impediment to their participation.
Mr. Jang?
Thank you. You know, as I've seen over the course of my career, the corporate approach to philanthropy has changed dramatically. There was a time in which it was a philanthropic discussion, and it was about the corporate philanthropy and support that was given in from that perspective. That shifted quite significantly. Not for any taxation or legal reasons, but for business reasons. And it shifted to concerns of market, concerns of being able to express their brand in association with a not-for-profit. And so discussions were less about getting a tax receipt, but rather getting exposure and the opportunity to actually have exposure through their corporate support. We're actually seeing things shift right now, and we're seeing a much stronger movement to CSR, corporate social responsibility. And that is becoming very critical for business and community reasons. For the business reasons, it's about engagement with their employees. It's about recruitment. It's about giving where we live. To use one of their phrases. But it's become really critical. I spent 8 years on the TELUS Community Foundation Board, and I knew very well and saw very firsthand how that corporation saw their role in terms of support for their communities. We're seeing a significant change right now around the idea that corporations are now taking a much more serious look for their role as it relates to how they engage with community.
Mr. Jang, just to follow up then, we're talking about cultural diplomacy and the internationalism of foreign policy.
Right.
You've said that corporate responsibility is more rooted in the community. How does that then translate to companies, and how do they then translate that to the international sector?
Right. So it's the alignment of approaches and values. So we see firsthand tours that are international of cultural performances that are well sponsored by corporations because they have businesses in those countries. And that's a very common relationship that gets built, whether it's a large accounting firm, that's quite common, these kinds of interests.
We've come to the end of our session, but if there is anything any of our witnesses wish to add, now is the time. Madame Lambert?
Yes, I would like to add something. I would like to add the fact that the international involvement in culture is extraordinary. It just in the CCA, our study center, we've had 100 and let's see, we started in '97, and we have 160, I think, postdocs. We have 800 pre-docs and master students. And these people come from all over the world, literally all over the world, for our various programs. And again, I've emphasized each time the importance of immediate face-to-face contact And I think that this is not, mass anything, but it really builds enormously. And this is real diplomacy, and it's really, cultural, and we as cultural ambassadors. And so that's what I want to add.
Thank you. Mr. Arthur, anything to add?
Nothing
No?
to add, thank you.
Mr. Jang?
I would just want to add that we do spend a lot of time talking about economic benefit, and that's critical. I understand that lens, which is important. We are very interested, and at the core of our business is intrinsic benefit and understanding the role we play and encouraging the role we play as it comes to culture and the role it has in engaging with new communities and healthier communities.
I want to thank, on behalf of the committee, all our witnesses. You've contributed immensely to our study with new dimensions. I trust that some of your words will be echoed through our report, and if there's anything else you wish to add, please contact our clerk. Thank you very much for your presence and particularly your recommendations and thoughts about our study. Senators, we are adjourned.